You're 58 years old and still working in a flower shop? You're just a useless shadow.
Stop it right now. How far are you two gonna drag this dinner down?
You chose silence. From now on, I will not be your mother. I will be the debt collector.
Texas has golden, dry afternoons so still you can hear the heartbeat of the earth. They say that in Austin, the wind doesn't just carry the smell of burnt grass, it carries the things left unsaid. I've lived here nearly 30 years, in a modest apartment overlooking Lady Bird Lake. From my balcony, the world hums in a rhythm I no longer follow, trucks rumbling over bridges, the faraway twang of country songs, young people laughing too loud, believing they're destined for greatness. And me, Evelyn Parker, 58, the woman behind the flower counter, wrapping tulips for other people's weddings. They see me as harmless, poor, perhaps, kind. The young clerk at the flower shop often smiles at me, pity tucked behind her politeness. Mrs. Parker, why don't you retire? At your age, you deserve some rest. I only smile. They have no idea these resign-stained hands once signed contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, or that in a quiet Austin bank sits enough money to buy the entire block we work on. But I don't need them to know. I've known what it feels like to be loved for money and abandoned for pride. When my husband left me for a younger accountant 22 years ago, I learned a brutal truth. The quieter a woman is, the weaker the world thinks she is. So I chose silence not as surrender, but as shelter. While the world assumed I was grieving, I was rebuilding brick by brick, thought by thought. Every morning I brew coffee in a porcelain cup with a small crack, my mother's only keepsake. She used to tell me, when someone looks down on you, don't argue. Let time speak for you. And I did. Time has spoken and paid me back in full. $58 million. Power. Freedom. But no one knows. Not Ryan, my son, who still believes his mother lives on government assistance. Not Harold, my father, who is renting to own the house that already bears my name on the deed. Not the neighbors, not the florist's owner, not anyone. I don't live in hiding because I'm afraid. I live this way because I want to see clearly, to know who people become when they think you have nothing left to offer. When people stop pretending to respect you, they reveal their true faces. And I want to see that. Neighbors wave, sometimes the kind of greeting reserved for someone gentle, forgettable. The paperboy drops the Austin Chronicle at my door each morning and calls, "Morning, ma'am." None of them know that behind the sunflower painting in my living room rests a hidden wall safe. Inside sleeps an empire. Stock certificates, investment deeds, ownership papers for 3 buildings. It amuses me, this double life. To sip cheap coffee in a diner while my signature moves markets. To listen to strangers complain about the crazy rich up north while stirring my sugar quietly, one of them. There's a strange poetry in that contradiction, power hidden inside humility, like a blade concealed in a flower. Sometimes, my son visits, gentle, loving, loyal. "Mom," he says, "Amber thinks you should sell this old apartment. I can help you find somewhere nicer." Amber, my daughter-in-law. A woman Texas has in thousands, beautiful, confident, convinced that the spotlight belongs to her. Her sentences often begin with should. You should dress up more. You should travel. You should move somewhere with central air. I don't dislike her, not exactly, but there's something in her eyes that makes me cautious. It's the look of someone who smiles not out of warmth, but to disguise disdain. At family dinners, I sit across from them, watching through the curve of my wine glass. Amber talks. Ryan laughs. I nod. It's a routine, one we all perform for the sake of civility. Those dinners happen at the end of every month at my father's house in Westlake Hills, the same house I secretly pay the mortgage for. Every time I step through that door, I feel like slipping into an old costume, the poor mother pretending to be strong. And I play the role well, but I know the performance will end someday. Texas nights carry the scent of ash, the smell of something that burned but hasn't quite died. I sit by the window, wine in hand, watching the city lights ripple across the lake. They remind me of the past, my mother's voice, the years when I was called useless, dependent, small. I remember how it felt to be looked at like dust, something to be brushed away, something that didn't matter. And maybe that's why I learned to live like dust. Dust goes unnoticed, but it seeps into everything, coats every surface, and quietly claims the entire room. That's what I've become: quiet, unremarkable, but present everywhere, woven into the city in ways no one can see. People like to say, the death of pride is when a person begins to live truthfully. But I think the opposite is true. When pride dies, real strength is born. Because pride isn't arrogance, not when you've earned it through survival. Pride is the memory of everything you endured without applause. Sometimes, I wonder what my mother would say if she saw me now. Would she recognize the woman who stayed quiet through betrayal, who watched her husband vanish into another life and built an empire from the silence he left behind? Or would she simply smile the way women smile when they know the battle was worth it? I don't yet know when that fire inside me will rise, but I can feel it drawing near, a pulse beneath the calm. A voice inside whispers, someone will cross the line. And when that happens, don't stay silent. I close my journal, turn off the lamp, and smile into the dark. The world thinks silence means defeat. But silence is the moment before the storm begins. Texas wasn't cold that evening, yet the wind carried the dry thirst of a fading summer, the kind that hums through the oak trees and makes the air taste faintly of dust and endings. The house in Westlake Hills glowed like a lantern against the dusk, golden light spilling through its windows and pouring over the rose garden outside, the same garden I quietly paid to maintain each month. No one knew, of course. They believed it belonged to my father, Harold Parker, a man who had filed for bankruptcy twice but still boasted, "I own this house, fair and square." I let him believe it. Some illusions are worth keeping if they help a man sleep through the night. Inside, the dining room shimmered in candlelight. The silverware gleamed. The air smelled of rosemary and roasted beef, Ryan's favorite since he was a boy. I had cooked it myself that morning, humming to the rhythm of memories I rarely allowed myself to touch. The grandfather clock ticked softly. Outside, crickets tuned their violins. Inside, everything looked perfect, polished, proper, rehearsed. Then the front door opened. Amber arrived late, as she always did, her perfume entering the room before she did, the scent of jasmine and money. Her heels struck the wooden floor like punctuation marks in a sentence only she believed mattered. "Sorry, traffic," she said, setting her Chanel bag on a chair. "Hope you haven't started." Her voice was sweet honey stirred with vinegar. I smiled. "We just sat down." I poured wine into her glass, steady hand, practiced grace. Harold began talking about golf, the one subject where he still felt like a king. Ryan spoke of a new project. At work, something about real estate analytics, but Amber kept interrupting, turning every sentence into a stage for her own stories about networking events and women in leadership brunches. I listened politely, my expression a calm mask. Inside, I cataloged every gesture, every flick of her manicured hand, a shadow among the people I loved and the people I no longer recognized. Dinner passed peacefully, until it didn't. Amber set her glass down and tilted her head toward me, a smile glinting sharp as the silver knife beside her plate. "Mother Evelyn," she said, voice soft, silky, dangerous. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I looked up. "Have you?" "Yes," she said sweetly. "You're always home, tending flowers, doing little things." "I just wonder," she paused, eyes glimmering with performative concern, "don't you ever feel a bit empty? At your age, no job, no husband, nothing to keep you busy. I'd hate for you to feel lonely." The words floated through the room like perfume turned poison. Ryan looked up immediately, Amber, come on. She raised her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. No, I mean it, she said, smiling wider. You should do something, Evelyn, even something small. Don't live off others. Life's too short to be useless. Silence fell so thick it pressed against the walls. I heard only the faint clink of the clock's pendulum. Across the table, my father lowered his eyes behind his wine glass. Ryan stared at his plate, shoulders tight with shame. And I looked only at the candle flame in front of me. It trembled, a thin, quivering blade of light. Its reflection burned inside my eyes, steady, metallic, useless. The word split something open inside me, sharp as a remembered scar. I had heard it before in 1998, in a cheap Dallas apartment, while my husband packed his suitcase without meeting my gaze. Evelyn, he had said, what are you good at besides papers and numbers? You're useless. You suffocate me. That night, I stood in silence, letting the insult bruise but not bleed. And tonight, I stood in silence again. Only this time, I knew exactly why. Amber leaned back, sipping her wine, her laughter dripping with mock sweetness. I don't mean it harshly, she added, pretending innocence. I just think everyone should have a purpose. You can't rely on others' kindness forever, right, Mom? My gaze lifted from the flame to meet hers. My voice, when it came, was almost a whisper, the kind of softness that unsettles. You're right, I said. Everyone should have a purpose. For a heartbeat, her eyes flickered, startled. Then I smiled. A small, precise smile, a smile honed like a blade drawn from its sheath. Do you have one yet, Amber? The room froze. Even the air forgot how to move. Ryan's fork hovered halfway to his mouth. My father looked at me, his expression unreadable. Amber blinked, color draining, then flooding back into her cheeks. Of course, she stammered, forcing a brittle laugh. I'm building my future. I don't want to be anyone's burden. I just wanted to help you reflect on your life a little, that's all. Thank you, I said, still smiling. I will reflect, soon. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, a sudden, low hiss that sounded almost like laughter. And somewhere deep inside me, something cracked, not pain, but awakening. My father cleared his throat. Dinner's wonderful, Evie. Ryan whispered, Mom, don't mind her. I don't mind, I said softly, setting down my fork. I'm just thinking. Amber shrugged, mistaking my calm for surrender. She didn't realize that in that single instant, she had written the first line of her own downfall. I straightened my back, glancing across the table, this table that once symbolized family, now nothing but a stage set for pretense. They thought I was background, a supporting role. But they forgot a play doesn't end until the silent one decides to speak. I poured more wine into my glass, tone light, expression serene. You're right, Amber, I said, eyes still on the crimson liquid swirling inside the glass. Life is short. I think it's time I did something about that. No one understood what I meant. But the candle in front of me flickered once, then went out as if even the flame knew what was coming. After that dinner, if it were you, humiliated by your own family in your own home, what would you do? Comment 2 if you'd stay silent and let them reveal who they truly are. Comment 3 if you'd rise, strike back, and keep your pride. The Texas night was damp. Clouds pressed low over Austin, heavy and dark, thick as torn black cloth. Thunder rolled across the plains like the growl of an old god warning the living to keep quiet. Lightning flashed briefly over Lady Bird Lake, turning the calm surface silver, then black again. In the small apartment overlooking that lake, time had slowed to a crawl. The clock on the wall ticked, each sound sharp, precise, and cold as a scalpel. Every beat felt like it was cutting away something: patience, faith, illusion, until only the raw core of truth remained. Evelyn Parker sat in her armchair, still wearing the pale blue dress from dinner. It was the same one she had chosen with quiet hope earlier that day, a modest dress, soft at the sleeves, elegant enough to show respect. Now it hung on her like memory itself, wrinkled, colorless under the lamplight. On the table before her sat a plate of untouched roast beef and potatoes, a portion she had brought home out of habit, not hunger. The meat had gone gray, the edges dry. The air smelled faintly of rain and rosemary, the scent of comfort that no longer comforted. Outside, the first drops began tapping the window frame, steady, rhythmic, the slow heartbeat of solitude. Evelyn had lived beside loneliness all her life, but never had it sat this close. It pressed against her chest like a weight she could no longer disguise beneath kindness. It wasn't Amber's insult that stung. She had heard sharper tongues and colder lies. It wasn't even her father's silence, that old familiar cowardice disguised as peacekeeping. No, it was Ryan, her son, the only person she had ever forgiven everything for. The moment he bowed his head and said nothing, something in her, something tender and sacred, cracked like glass under strain. For a while, she just sat there, motionless. Then a thin, humorless laugh slipped from her throat, brittle as frost. "Useless," she whispered to the empty room. The word rolled through her mind like metal scraping against flesh. It cut deep, bloodless, but brutal, the kind of wound that makes the soul leak drop by drop until it is empty. The rain began to fall harder. Each drop struck the glass with precision, as if the sky itself was marking time for her unraveling. She listened, because the sound of rain was the only thing that had ever stayed loyal. After a long while, Evelyn rose. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor as she crossed the room. The wind pressed against the windows like a restless spirit, trying to come inside. At the far wall stood a heavy cedar cabinet, plain, unremarkable, except for the faint outline where it met the molding. She knelt beside it, her body moving from memory. Her fingers found the narrow seam at the back, pressed once. Click, the cabinet shifted a few inches to the left, revealing a hidden steel door. She entered the code without looking, a series of numbers that had been branded into her mind by 1,000 careful nights. 1, 2, 3 beeps. The lock released with a soft sigh. Inside lay the quiet truth of her life, stacks of white paper, neatly bound. Savings certificates, stock portfolios, property deeds, sealed envelopes, marked in her precise handwriting. The air inside smelled of ink and old ambition. A small digital screen blinked to life, its green numbers glowing against the steel. 58,103,226. Evelyn stared at it. Not with pride. Pride had burned out of her years ago, but with the heavy recognition that all her victories, all her sleepless nights, all her careful planning, meant nothing if the world refused to see them. What was power if it had to hide behind silence? Her reflection blurred on the polished door, warped by tears she hadn't realized were falling. One drop splashed against the papers, darkening the edge of a bond certificate. Then another. Not the tears of weakness, no, these were the tears of something awakening. The kind that came when a lifetime of restraint finally cracked. Evelyn had endured everything love could destroy. She had buried her mother young. She had watched her husband walk away with another woman, younger, hungrier, crueler. She had lost her reputation to whispers and rebuilt her fortune from nothing. And through it all, she had believed that goodness was its own protection, that quiet dignity would be enough. But staring at that glowing number, she understood the crueler truth. The world never respects what it cannot see. Hidden strength is mistaken for weakness. Humility is mistaken for insignificance. And when you hide your worth too well, people forget you ever had any. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing away the tears, leaving behind something harder. Then, to her own surprise, a small sound escaped her lips, a laugh, low and bitter. How absurd it was that she had let them think for 2 decades that she was a gentle, dependent widow. How absurd that she had worn smallness like armor. Lightning flared outside. For a split second, Her reflection in the safe door glowed like fire trapped in glass. Then, she heard it faint, but unmistakable, a voice from the farthest corner of memory. "You can endure humiliation," Evelyn, her mother had said once, "but never defeat." The words struck like a match to kindling. Evelyn straightened. Her eyes, once soft with exhaustion, now sharpened with something cold and alive. She crossed the room to the mirror by the door. The woman looking back at her wasn't broken. She was luminous, carved by years, yes, but gleaming with a new kind of defiance. For the first time in years, Evelyn Parker didn't see herself as invisible. She saw herself as dangerous. She walked to her desk. On it lay an old brown leather notebook, its spine cracked and edges yellowed. It had once been her accounting ledger, now it would become something else. Entirely. She opened it to the first blank page and wrote in calm, deliberate strokes, "The plan begins now." Below it, she drew 3 neat lines and filled in the names: Naomi Rivera Finance, Julian Marks Legal, Marcus Steen Investigation. Then, beneath them all, she wrote one more name in darker ink, the letters pressed deep enough to tear the page: Amber Collins, teach her what useless really means. Her hand stilled. Outside, lightning flickered again, spreading across the lake. Each strike shattered the reflection of the city into 1,000 broken mirrors. And in every fractured piece, she saw herself, the wife, the widow, the ignored mother, all fusing back together into a single, unstoppable whole. The clock ticked on. But its rhythm had changed. It no longer sounded like the slow death of hours. It sounded like a drumbeat, steady, deliberate, alive. The heartbeat of something just beginning. Evelyn closed the safe, turned on the desk lamp. Golden light spilled across the notebook, illuminating the page like dawn breaking over a desert stone. Her shadows stretched long and sharp across the floor. Then she reached for her phone. The name on the screen glowed softly: Naomi Rivera. For a moment, Evelyn didn't press it. She wanted to memorize this instant, the line between grief and power, sorrow and awakening. The moment before the storm takes its first breath, she pressed call. The phone rang twice. Then came Naomi's familiar voice, heavy with sleep. "Evie? God, it's almost midnight. Is everything all right?" Evelyn's gaze drifted back to the safe, the cold silver door reflecting the faint gold of the lamp. $58,103,226, the sum of a lifetime's silence. Enough to rebuild her world, enough to rewrite the rules. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, rich, low, and certain. The voice of a woman who had just remembered who she was. "I'm fine, Naomi," she said softly. Then, after a pause long enough for thunder to roll through the distance, she added, "I just think it's time we make life a little more interesting." Outside, the rain began again, harder, louder, as if applauding. Wind rattled the glass. Somewhere beyond the storm, a new Evelyn Parker took her first breath. Not the quiet florist, not the broken wife, but the woman the world had underestimated for far too long. It was still before dawn. The storm hadn't passed, it had only paused to gather strength. Rain struck the window in sharp, relentless rhythms, as if the Texas sky itself trembled at what was about to awaken. On the desk, a cup of coffee had gone cold, its surface still and black as ink. Beside it, a single lamp burned, pale light pooling over a stack of deeds, notebooks, and a phone that vibrated for the second time. The screen glowed. Naomi Rivera. Evelyn answered on the first ring. "Naomi, I want to invest again. Right now." Her voice was calm, but there was something in it that made Naomi, a woman who had negotiated hundreds of ruthless deals, feel the back of her neck prickle. "Eve, it's 5 a.m. What kind of investment are we talking about?" "Real estate," Evelyn said. "Downtown Austin. I want 3 buildings. As soon as possible, cash." There was a long pause on the other end. the sound of disbelief wrapped in a whisper of awe. Naomi finally exhaled. You told me you were out of the market, that you'd retired for good. You can step away from the game, Evelyn said, her tone low and even. But sometimes you have to return to the board to remind everyone who taught them the rules. Before Naomi could respond, a soft click ended the call. Evelyn turned to her laptop. Dozens of tabs blinked across the screen: bank accounts, fund managers, property databases. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, fast and deliberate, the hands of a commander who had trained her whole life for this moment. $5 million. The first transfer. 3 prime properties in downtown Austin, the same streets where Amber had once bragged to her friends. My mother-in-law could never afford to step foot in this neighborhood. Now, Evelyn Parker was about to own it. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. Something inside her, the shards of humiliation, the remnants of old pride, began to align, forming a Pexted $18 shape, both beautiful and terrible. The shape of a creature that had been silent, chained, waiting. The phone rang again. Julian Marks, her lawyer of 25 years, voice rough with sleep. Evelyn, he rasped. What's going on? Do you know what time it is? Yes, she said evenly. Time to begin. Begin what? I need you to prepare an eviction notice for a tenant. Today. Julian hesitated. Name? Amber Collins. A silence followed, brief but heavy. Your daughter-in-law? He asked carefully. Not my daughter-in-law, Evelyn corrected, her tone sharp enough to slice through the dark. A rude stranger living on property she doesn't own. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried the weight of authority, the kind of finality that didn't allow for discussion. Julian cleared his throat. And what are the grounds for eviction? Insulting the owner of the premises, a serious breach of the respect clause. Evelyn, he said slowly, there is no respect clause in the lease. Then add one. Another click. Another call ended. Evelyn exhaled, calm, steady. Her hand didn't shake. Her pulse didn't quicken. Never in 30 years had she spoken so quickly, so decisively. The woman who had once cooked roast beef and folded napkins for her family was gone. The one who used to bow her head when her husband spoke, or stayed silent while her son's wife smiled through her teeth, gone too. What remained was the voice of a general, issuing her first command in a war she hadn't realized she was destined to fight. The rain thickened outside, drumming the glass. Evelyn scrolled through her contact list, stopping at a name that hadn't crossed her mind in years: Marcus Dean. A former FBI agent, the man who had once helped her trace a fraudster in 2008, and the only person she trusted with secrets too sharp for anyone else. The line clicked, then a gravelly voice. Evelyn Parker. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. Marcus, she said. I have a job for you. What kind? Level? Top secret. Personal. Target? Amber Collins. I want everything on her: career, finances, contacts, history, lies, everything. There was a pause, the sound of someone sitting up straighter. Everything, Evelyn, that's a full sweep. It'll require deep access. You have it, she said. And you know I pay better than anyone. Silence again, this time more thoughtful. When Marcus finally spoke, his tone had changed. Hearing you now, he said slowly. I don't think this is just an investigation. It sounds like a campaign. Evelyn's lips curved faintly. Call it justice, if that helps you sleep. When do you want results? 48 hours. I want the first report by then. Evelyn, Marcus, she interrupted, not harsh, but absolute. I'm not asking, I'm ordering. He didn't argue. Because in that moment, Marcus Dean understood the woman who used to send him Christmas cookies no longer existed. The person on the line was someone preparing for war. Evelyn set the phone down. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was a feeling she hadn't tasted in years, sharp and electric. It reminded her of the night she made her first investment decades ago, when every man in the office called her the little secretary. She had beaten them with patience and precision, watching as each of their empires collapsed while hers rose quietly, brick by brick. Now she would do the same, only this time the battlefield wasn't business. It was personal. The weapons were money, silence, and time. She opened her laptop again and created a new folder. In bold black letters, she typed, Operation Reclamation. Under it, 4 lines appeared. Finance, Naomi, in charge. Legal, Julian, handle documentation. Intelligence, Marcus, gather everything. Enemy, Amber Collins. Each keystroke sounded like a gun being loaded. Evelyn saved the file, shut the laptop, and rose. The room was dark except for the faint glow of dawn creeping under the curtains. She walked out to the balcony. The storm was ending. A violet light spread across the lake, soft and luminous, painting the surface like silk. The air smelled of wet soil and new beginnings. Austin lay silent, peaceful, unaware that inside this small apartment, a new empire had just drawn its first breath. Evelyn stood there for a long while, letting the wind comb through her hair. Her pulse drummed steady and alive. The old fear was gone. In its place burned a single truth, fierce and clean. She whispered it to the morning, her voice gentle but unyielding. Thank you, Amber. You woke what the world forgot, that I don't need protection. I am the thing people should fear. She turned back inside, the edges of her mouth curving in a quiet smile. The first light of dawn hit her face, the face of a woman reborn, not in forgiveness, but in clarity. When you are underestimated, how will you choose to reclaim your place? Comment 4, if you believe silence and success are the sweetest revenge. Comment 5, if you believe sometimes you must strike back hard so others know who you are. A slow, heavy blues guitar moaned from the old radio in the flower shop. The melody was pure Texas, sorrowful, proud, soaked in dust and defiance. Evelyn Parker sat behind the counter in a beige cotton shirt, a cup of black coffee cooling beside the register. Steam rose, blending with the scent of freshly cut roses, and rain seeping through the doorway. Outside, someone slammed a car door. A horn blared. Life went on loud, ordinary, blind. No one knew that inside this small shop, a quiet war had just entered its first day. Day 1, the eviction, 9 a.m. At the Westlake Hills house, morning sunlight hit the glass like judgment. A man in a blue uniform rang the bell. When Amber opened the door, silk nightgown, phone in hand, he simply handed her a document stamped in red, notice of termination of tenancy, effective immediately. Amber blinked. There must be some mistake. My landlord is Lakeview Property Management. The man consulted his clipboard. According to the registry, Lakeview is owned by Parker Holdings, LLC. Evelyn Parker is the CEO. The words landed like thunder. Evelyn is my mother-in-law. And now, the man said evenly, she's also your landlord. Amber stared at the paper. 4 short lines spelled it out in legal precision. Verbal harassment toward property owner. 30 days to vacate. No drama, no shouting. Just cold truth, hand-delivered. Back in the flower shop, Evelyn's phone buzzed. A message from Julian Marks. Eviction served. Reaction, disbelief, panic. Step 1 completed. Evelyn lifted her cup. The coffee had gone bitter. She took a sip anyway. Justice, she murmured. Tastes like burnt coffee, bitter, but warm. Day 2, the exposure. In Dallas, at the offices of Elite Events and Planning, an HR clerk opened an anonymous email. Please verify the educational credentials of your employee, Miss Amber Collins. Possible discrepancies attached. Attached were forged diplomas and a statement from the university registrar. No student by that name ever existed. By noon, Amber was called into a meeting room. At 1:30, she walked out with red eyes and a cardboard box of personal items, Whispers followed her down the hall like a funeral procession. She got caught. Fake degree. Guess she fooled everyone. Outside, the heat pressed against her skin. She dialed Ryan again voicemail. Her reflection in the car window looked older than yesterday. Meanwhile, in Austin, Evelyn wrapped a bouquet of white tulips for a customer. Beautiful choice, she said gently, tying the ribbon. When the woman left, Evelyn studied the petals in her hand, delicate, white, perfect. Tulips, she said softly to herself, are most beautiful when cut at exactly the right moment, not too soon, not too late. Day 3. The collapse, 8 a.m. Amber swiped her credit card at Starbucks, declined. Tried another, declined. She opened her banking app. The screen blinked red. Account temporarily frozen for verification. 3 minutes later, alerts flooded in. Suspicious activity detected. Funds on hold for review. Her throat tightened. The barista's voice broke through the ringing in her ears. Would you like to pay cash? Amber forced a smile, rummaging through her purse. Nothing. No cash, no working card, no income. Across town, Marcus Dean sent a short encrypted message. Target's accounts flagged by multiple institutions. Fraud protocols triggered. Estimated 72 hours to full freeze. Evelyn read it in silence. She didn't reply. She simply opened the shop's door and let the wind rush through. The petals on the counter trembled as if bowing in approval. Day 4. The scandal. The storm reached the headlines. At noon, a post appeared on San Antonio Business Wire. Local investor Richard Hall under investigation for alleged affair and misappropriation of client funds. The post included screenshots, text messages, hotel receipts. In every photo, one name repeated: Amber Collins. By evening, the gossip had spread across every feed from Houston to Dallas. The glamorous event planner exposed. Fake degree, married investor. Fraud inquiry pending. Richard Hall's wife, a banker known for her precision and fury, filed for divorce before sunset. The following day, Hall's company accounts were frozen. Amber's name appeared in the investigation file as associate of interest. In 4 days, the woman who once sat at a dinner table calling her mother-in-law useless watched her world implode. Austin hummed with whispers. She lied about her degree. She's being evicted. She's connected to that San Antonio scandal. Rumor in Texas spreads faster than wildfire. Half of it untrue, all of it lethal. And in the center of it, Evelyn Parker, the architect of the quiet storm. She sat in her little flower shop trimming wilted stems, her expression calm, almost tender. Customers came and went, carrying bouquets of lilies and roses. Each time the door chimed, she greeted them with the warmth of an old friend. No one suspected that behind those steady eyes lay the mind of a strategist who had just dismantled an entire false kingdom. When the last customer left, she cleaned the counter, turned the closed sign, and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. The smell of roasted bitterness filled the air. She poured herself a cup, sat by the window, and watched Lady Bird Lake shimmer under the orange glow of sunset. The water was calm, gold fading into crimson, the same colors as victory and dusk. She thought of Amber, of her shock, her denial, her desperate calls that went unanswered. Evelyn did not rejoice. Her triumph wasn't gloating, it was quiet, measured the satisfaction of balance restored. Justice, she whispered again, tastes like burnt coffee, bitter, but warm. Outside, thunder rolled. One last time somewhere far beyond the hills. The sound was low, final, like the closing of a door. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the edges of her lips curving into the faintest smile. For the first time in years, she felt warmth not borrowed from anyone else, not from family, love, or forgiveness, but from herself, from the justice she had carved out with her own hands. She looked around her small shop, the jars of flowers, the faint hum of the radio, the scent of rain on pavement, and thought, this is what peace sounds like after the storm. The blues guitar on the radio slid into its final chord, a single note lingering like a sigh. Outside, Austin breathed, unaware that somewhere on the edge of the lake, one quiet woman had just rewritten every rule that once bound her. And when the last light of day disappeared beyond the horizon, Evelyn Parker whispered into the dark, "Checkmate." Afternoon light fell over Austin in a pale golden wash, warm, but strangely hollow, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch what was coming. Inside Evelyn Parker's apartment, everything was still. So still, you could hear the slow ticking of the clock in the kitchen, each second a soft, deliberate echo marking the end of something. She sat by the window with a half-empty glass of red wine, the stem balanced between her fingers. The laptop on the table glowed in the dim light, paused on a web page headline, "The Making of a Manipulator Premieres Tonight at 8 p.m." The words shimmered on the screen like an accusation and a confession all at once. Evelyn stared at them without blinking, her reflection ghosting over the glass, calm, unreadable, almost regal. Then came the sound she had been expecting, though not this soon. A knock, not loud, but rapid, uneven, desperate, the heartbeat of someone who had run out of places to go. Evelyn set her wine down, rose from the chair, and crossed the room. The faint smell of rain drifted in through the cracks of the door. Texas rain, heavy and wild, washing dust off everything except guilt. When she opened it, she almost didn't recognize the woman standing on the threshold. Amber Collins. Her once glossy hair was tangled, streaked with sweat and tears. Mascara had bled down her cheeks like soot. A thin coat clung to her shoulders, and her eyes, once full of entitlement and self-assurance, were now hollow. She looked less like a person and more like the echo of one. "You've destroyed me," she said, voice breaking. "Please, stop. I have nothing left." For a heartbeat, Evelyn said nothing. She simply looked at her, the woman who had mocked her, erased her, spoken poison into her son's ear. Now, stripped of everything but the truth. Finally, Evelyn tilted her head, her expression calm, so calm it was cruel. "Nothing left is good," she said softly. "People only start living honestly when they lose everything." Amber took a shaky step forward, her breath catching. "You call this justice?" She spat. "I've lost my home, my job, my name. The whole of Texas is calling me a fraud." Evelyn turned away, crossing back to the table. She picked up her glass again, the red liquid glinting against the fading light. Her reflection in the window looked strange, half angel, half executioner. "You call that destruction?" she said quietly. "I call it correction." Amber gave a broken laugh, wild, ragged, half hysteria, half disbelief. "You're insane, obsessed. I said a few words at dinner one stupid night, and you destroyed my entire life over it." Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she turned the laptop toward Amber and pressed play. A low, haunting score filled the room. On the screen, a title appeared in white over black, "The Making of a Manipulator." The first image flickered Amber in her wedding dress, radiant, smiling into the camera. Then came the voiceover, smooth, cold, almost surgical. Behind the perfect smile lay a pattern of calculated deceit. Amber's breath hitched. She stumbled backward, eyes wide in horror. "What is this?" she gasped. "What are you doing?" "A trailer," Evelyn replied evenly, her tone polite as though discussing a film premiere rather than a public reckoning. "Tonight at 8, all of Texas will finally see who you are." It hit Amber like a blade to the chest. She crumpled, knees hitting the floor. The sound that left her throat wasn't quite human, a cracked, raw sob that shook the walls. "You're a monster," she screamed, voice hoarse and wild. "You're not human. Do you know I won't survive this?" Evelyn crouched beside her. She studied the wreck of a woman before her, her gaze cool but not gleeful, like a surgeon examining a wound they had chosen to inflict. "No, Amber," she said quietly, her voice steady as glass. "I'm not a monster. I'm just the pest you couldn't kill." The room went still. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of thunder rolling toward the hills. Amber lifted her face, eyes wet and trembling. "All this," she whispered, "over one word? Useless?" Evelyn stood. Her movement was slow, deliberate, a queen reclaiming her crown. She walked toward the window where the sunset spilled through the curtains, painting everything in shades of gold and blood. "No," she said softly. "I did this because you needed to learn something your parents never taught you, that when you look down on someone, that person might be the one who decides your fate." Amber said nothing. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Evelyn turned back, stepping closer until the space between them felt electric. "People like you mistake silence for weakness," she continued. "You think those who smile have surrendered. But silence, Amber, silence is the sound of planning." Amber's chin quivered. "You're proud of this?" Evelyn's expression didn't change. "No, pride is for fools. This isn't pride, it's restoration." For a long moment, neither woman moved. The rain outside had stopped. The world felt suspended, two lives on opposite sides of justice, frozen in a single breath. Then Evelyn did something unexpected. She reached out and placed a hand on Amber's shoulder. Not a gesture of comfort, but of finality, the cold mercy of a victor. "Get up," she said softly. "Wipe your tears. If you're smart, start over honestly. If not, then disappear." Amber stared at her, and in that look was something more complex than hatred, recognition. For the first time, she truly saw Evelyn not as a meek florist, not as a mother-in-law, but as a force of nature. She rose unsteadily, brushed her hair from her face, and took a trembling step toward the door. Before leaving, she turned, voice small, almost reverent. "You've won." Evelyn lifted her glass again, the last sip of wine staining her lips crimson. "No, Amber," she said quietly. "I didn't win. I just took back what was mine." The door clicked shut behind her. Silence returned, heavy, profound, complete. On the laptop, the trailer kept playing. The narrator's voice echoed through the still air. Manipulation always meets its reckoning. Evelyn watched until the screen faded to black. Then she closed the laptop, leaned back in her chair, and looked toward the sunset outside. Her smile was small, not triumph, not vengeance, but the peace of someone who had walked through fire and come out shaped, not scorched. She raised her empty glass slightly toward the quiet room. "Some pests bite back, darling," she murmured. "Remember that." The light outside dimmed, the sky folding into dusk. Somewhere beyond the city, thunder growled again, not a warning this time, but applause. When it comes to fear, what truly terrifies an enemy? Comment 6 if you believe it's explosive rage. Comment 7 if you believe it's the silent smile of someone who holds total control. Night in Austin blazed with light. Neon spilled from the bars on 6th Street, guitars cried through open doors, and the air carried the mingled scent of smoke, rain, and barbecue. The city pulsed, with noise alive, restless, oblivious. But high above the streets, on the 12th floor of an old riverside building, the world had gone still. In the half-dark apartment, only one woman sat in the glow of a television screen, and all of Texas was watching her. The logo appeared, the making of a manipulator. The music was slow, heavy, a low hum of strings and static. Then came the narrator's voice, calm and grave. The story of a woman who deceived, betrayed, and nearly destroyed those who trusted her most. Amber Collins' name filled the screen in white letters over black. Photos flashed her wedding, her falsified diplomas, bank records, and grainy surveillance stills from a San Antonio hotel. Each image cut like a blade. Viewers across the state fell silent. Then the silence shattered. Within minutes, the internet ignited like dry prairie grass. Twitter threads exploded. Reddit burned. In Dallas, the Texas Tribune posted its headline in bold letters, "Amber Collins, the gold digger of Austin, the woman who fooled an entire city." By midnight, Every local network picked up the story. Each repost, each comment, was gasoline poured on the blaze Evelyn had struck with a single spark. On the screen, the second act began. The camera panned over a small flower shop, sunlight spilling through the window, petals glowing like glass. Behind the counter sat Evelyn Parker, her hands sticky with sap, arranging roses with quiet precision. The narrator spoke again, the tone shifting from condemnation to awe. Mrs. Evelyn Parker once thought Invisible turned out to be one of the most successful private investors in the state of Texas. A woman who quietly owned millions, yet lived as a florist by choice, and she was the one who revealed the true face of Amber Collins. The image froze on Evelyn's profile. Across the bottom of the screen, a subtitle appeared, "The Quiet Millionaire of Texas." Evelyn didn't move. Her eyes glistened faintly in the reflection of the screen. For a long time, she simply watched as if witnessing her own resurrection from a distance. Then a single tear slid down her cheek, not from joy, not from regret, but from the release of a soul that had been chained for decades and finally set free. The phone on the table began to buzz. The screen lit up. Ryan. Her hand trembled slightly as she answered. "Mom?" His voice cracked, half tears, half disbelief. "I just watched it all, every minute. I don't even know what to say." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. He went on, voice breaking in waves. "I've never been prouder of you." Her throat tightened. "You're not angry with me?" "Angry?" He laughed softly, a sound roughened by emotion. "You saved me from someone who only ever used us. You didn't destroy the family, Mom, you protected it. You showed me what real strength looks like." Evelyn pressed the phone against her chest, closing her eyes. For the first time in years, her tears came freely, not bitter or hidden, but clean, honest, unashamed. They traced warm paths down her hands, washing away every word that had ever been thrown at her, useless, weak, forgettable. Outside, the sounds of Austin drifted upward. Laughter, sirens, car horns, the distant beat of a country song. The city kept moving, oblivious, while inside this quiet room, a woman was reborn. Her phone vibrated again. Journalists, investors, strangers, everyone wanted a comment. Evelyn ignored them all. She silenced the calls, drew the curtains, and turned off the television. Only one small lamp stayed lit beside the half-finished glass of wine. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper in her own handwriting, a note she had written weeks ago on the first night of her plan. "Silence is also power." She smiled faintly. It was true. Every quiet moment she had endured, every insult, every look of pity had been armor being forged. What they mistook for surrender had only been strategy. Everything Amber once mocked, simplicity, humility, restraint, was exactly what had made Evelyn unstoppable. Now, the whole of Texas knew it. On the late-night news broadcast, a final headline rolled across the screen. "From useless to unbreakable, Evelyn Parker named Texas's most successful anonymous investor." Evelyn stood slowly, the floor creaking under her bare feet. She walked to the balcony and pushed open the door. The night air met her like an old friend, cool, damp, carrying the faint smell of cedar and rain-soaked earth. Down below, Lady Bird Lake shimmered with city lights. From downtown, fireworks burst red, gold, white, painting the sky in wild color. Not for her, of course. Some college festival, maybe a sports victory. But as she watched the bursts of color bloom and vanish, she couldn't help but feel that they were hers too. The light from the fireworks washed over her face, mingling with the last traces of tears. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about revenge or justice or even survival. She was simply alive, present in her own skin, no longer shrinking, no longer waiting. Her mind drifted back to her son's voice. "Mom, I'm proud of you," she whispered to the night, her words carried off by the Texas wind. I'm proud of myself too, son. A soft breeze tangled her hair. Somewhere below, a group of students cheered, a dog barked, life rolled on. But for Evelyn, time seemed to slow, the city lights flickering against her skin like stars come down to rest. She turned back into the apartment. On the table, the wine glass glowed faintly in the lamplight. Beside it lay her closed journal, the one labeled Project E. H. The story was almost finished now. She ran a hand over its worn cover, then whispered, almost to herself, I was never useless. I was just waiting for my turn. Then she laughed softly, not the laugh of victory but of clarity. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wildflowers from the lake shore. Fireworks continued to flare over the skyline, red against black, like sparks from a soul reborn. Evelyn stepped back onto the balcony, lifted her chin, and let the glow of the city reflect in her eyes. Below her, the surface of Lady Bird Lake caught the colors, turning each burst of fire into ripples of light. For a long, long while, she simply watched. And there she stood, the woman they once called useless, silent, unbroken, and blazing brighter than any flame. Night fell over Austin, wrapping the city in a soft, silken light reflected across the still mirror of Lady Bird Lake. From somewhere along the river drifted the faint hum of jazz, slow, smoky, alive. The melody mingled with the whisper of wind slipping through oak trees, carrying with it the scent of wet bark and faraway rain. No more whispers, no more phone calls from reporters. No more buzzing messages or endless requests for interviews. Only silence, the kind of silence Evelyn Parker had waited for nearly her entire life. She sat on the balcony of her apartment, a thin shawl resting around her shoulders, a glass of red wine catching the glow of the city. The lights shimmered across her face, deep eyes, serene and unguarded. It was not the smile of a victor, not the satisfaction of conquest, but the quiet expression of someone who had finally found herself. On the small table beside her, her laptop remained open, the soft screen light flickering in the dark. Across it stretched the newest headline from the Texas Tribune, Evelyn Parker, the quiet millionaire who changed the game. Beneath it, hundreds of comments scrolled endlessly, strangers praising her courage, her brilliance, her patience. She didn't read them. She didn't need to. Evelyn gazed at the glowing words for a moment, her face lit by the pale blue of her own legend, then closed the laptop gently, as if sealing the final page of her long, turbulent story. The faint sound of the clasp clicking shut was oddly final, the sound of an ending that didn't hurt. A light breeze drifted across the balcony, brushing her hair and carrying the faint perfume of flowers from the shop below. It was the same scent that had defined her quiet years, the scent of simplicity, of rebuilding. She inhaled deeply, the aroma of lavender and rose mingling with the sharpness of the night air. Then she listened. The distant hum of traffic fading, the soft lapping of water against stone, the muted rhythm of her own heart, slow, steady, peaceful. For the first time in decades, the silence didn't frighten her. It soothed her. No more Amber. No more cruel laughter over dinner. No more her father's quiet disapproval or her son's bowed head when she was insulted. No more years spent pretending to be small just to stay unseen. It was all over. And in that ending, something new began, fragile, luminous, like the first breath after a long storm. She lifted her glass toward the skyline, the city's reflection shimmering across the surface of the lake below. The wine caught the glow of neon, turning dark red, the color of life, not war. Her voice, when it came, was low and soft, a whisper that sounded like prayer. "Here's to the useless ones," she murmured. "The quiet ones. We outlive them all." She took a slow sip. The wine was bitter but warm. A drop slipped from the rim of the glass, falling onto the table. It spread across the wood like a small bloom of blood, a quiet symbol of everything she had endured, lost, and reclaimed. From a bar down the street, a television was playing the late-night re-airing of The Making of a Manipulator. The host's voice, faint and distant, floated up with the night wind. Sometimes justice doesn't need noise. It only needs someone patient enough to stay silent until time takes their side. Evelyn smiled, the corners of her lips softening. It wasn't pride, it was grace. The grace of someone who had passed through fire and learned not to burn. She leaned back in her chair, tilting her face toward the Texas sky, endless and star-bright, each star a small, silent witness to the woman she had become. Above her, the night glowed vast, calm, and merciful. The phone on the table vibrated once. She looked down. Ryan. A single message. "Mom, I think I finally understand why you chose silence. I love you." Evelyn read it twice, then set the phone gently beside the glass. She didn't reply. Her heart did that for her, a quiet, invisible smile blooming deep within her chest. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because, at last, there didn't need to be. She sat there as the city's lights danced on the lake. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, fading into the night. A couple laughed on the street below. A jazz trumpet climbed and fell, like a sigh released into the stars. Every sound of life was distant, and yet she had never felt closer to the world. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, railing not the weary widow, not the woman mocked for her simplicity, but someone new. Someone reborn not in wealth, or vengeance, or public victory, but in peace. She thought of her mother's words, spoken decades ago in a small Dallas kitchen. "When someone looks down on you, don't argue. Let time speak for you." Evelyn smiled. Time had spoken. And it had spoken in her voice. She closed her eyes. The wind brushed against her cheek, cool and clean. The night seemed to lean closer, wrapping her in its hush. For years, she had believed that silence was what weakness sounded like. Now she knew it was the sound of strength. In that quiet Texas night, Evelyn Parker, once dismissed, forgotten, and called useless, was reborn. Not with applause, not with headlines or crowds, but with stillness. Just her, the wine, the lake, and the quiet hum of a world that had finally made room for her peace. A quiet triumph. A hymn for everyone who has ever been underestimated, proof that silence is not surrender. It is the highest form of power. After all, what is true victory? Comment 7 if you believe victory is when your enemy falls. Comment 8 if you believe victory is when your heart is finally at peace.